We are, there it is. We are in our second week of UGA spring break, and so I know a few people are out of town because of that. Also see a few new faces. If you're a new face, we'd love for you to stick around. I would personally love to meet you. I know our members would love to sink their claws into you and welcome you with, I will say, of all the churches that I've been a part of, this church attacks new people the most with generosity and embrace. I mean, it is like one of my former interns for the campus ministry I used to work at. He said, that phrase, we want to sink our claws into when someone new walks in. And that's where I get that phrase. This church lives into that better than any church I really have been a part of. But with that, all that said, let me say, Dustin, thank you for having us sing a new song. If you didn't like it, I personally don't care because my son, Jesse, loved it. He was bopping up and down. So, no offense, but his opinion matters to me more than yours does. And Jesse was really getting into it. So Jesse's finally getting into worship. With that said, though, this spring, we are working our way through the 10 Commandments, command by command. And today we've arrived at the fifth commandment. And I've shared this, but this is probably the command that has had the most tangible and practical impact on how I think about my life. Of all the commands, and I mean, there's probably the only thing I've studied more in depth in Scripture than the 10 Commandments is probably the Lord's Prayer. Really have immersed myself in the 10 Commandments, but this command, more than any of the other ones, has really directly impacted how I view my life and the world. And so I'm excited to share about it with you today. If you can't tell by the pace of my voice, I'm very excited. This command comes to us in Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, and it reads like this: honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. Let me just go ahead and explain that the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. So this is given to the group of slaves who were brought up out of Egypt, and God is going to deliver them into their hands, the land of Canaan, which is the land that God had promised to their ancestor Abram or Abraham, right? And so that is what he's talking about, so that you might live a rich and full, abundant life in the land that I'm giving you, the promised land. Honor your father and your mother. So that's the way this command is framed and the way it's kind of working in its context. This command is, in my opinion, such a fascinating command because of where it stands inside of the 10 Commandments, right? So think for a second about what we've just achieved in the 10 Commandments. We worked our way through Commandments 1 through 4, and those are all vertical commandments. They're about our relationship with Yahweh, the one who delivered us out of slavery and into his abundant provision and into his care, into his salvation, right? The next set of commandments will start with commandment number 6, which is do not murder, and it'll go all the way through commandment 10, and they are all horizontal commandments. They are about the way that me and you interact with other people. However, this fifth commandment stands in between those two sections. And as it stands in between those two sections, it recognizes that parents are both human, but they do possess a God-like quality. Think about it this way. We as Christians believe that God created the world out of nothing. The technical Latin term for this is creation ex nihilo. That God breathed the world into existence, right? And God said, and it was so, right? God brings something out of nothing. And the closest thing that we have to that in our frail, feeble, and extraordinarily finite human existence is parenthood. I mean, think about this, right? Theologically, becoming a parent is the greatest expression of our identity as those who are God's image, okay? So in the fifth commandment, what he's calling us to do is he's calling us to honor those who wielded their image-bearing capacities in order to continue on the life that God originally set into motion. Now, before we can really unpack what this command means for you and what this command means for me, I think we first have to address the issue of authority, all right? Authority is often seen as something close to a swear word by many people, particularly in religious settings. And I must admit to you that there's part of me that has a lot of empathy for that view. Too often, and way too often in churches, authority has been abused, right? There are illustrations of this and examples of this that will fill up your newsfeed if you want it to. If you look up a few, trust me, the algorithm will take over, and it has enough amp to take over, and it can send you story after story of how authority has been abused, and particularly in religious settings. And because of this, many cannot see a difference between the two things, authority and abuse. They are one and the same. Therefore, many function inside of a paradigm in which any seeming hierarchy, like the power that God bestows parents, is falsely equated to tyranny. And because of this idea of honor has become a difficult word for us to understand. We often take it to mean that you cannot do anything unless your parents first say that you can, that you must agree with them 100% of the time. And so when we read that phrase, honor your father and your mother, what we hear is this: enter into an oppressive relationship with your parents, obey their rules blindly, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, or else. Right? I mean, it's hard when we've equated authority and abuse. When you equate those two things and you hear that phrase, honor your father and mother, it's hard not to hear what I just read, right? This paradigm in which we equate authority and abuse, I think has created three different problematic postures towards the fifth commandment. The first is willing oppression, all right? The second is complete rejection, and the third is apathy. Okay, so let's take each of these for a quick second here. Willing oppression. Okay, some people, this is not many people, and this is not many young people, but there are some people that really do like rules, okay? I am one of them. And they are totally fine with not having to think, all right? My parents give me rules. I don't have to think. I just kind of blindly live by them. And, and here's the thing, though. In the long run, that doesn't honor your father and mother. Okay, just to blindly follow whatever they say without ever critically thinking about the world around you is not something that would actually honor your parents. Let me unpack that in two ways. First, to honor does not mean to replicate. All right? If my kids, I now have two kids, and if all they do were to replicate my life think about it this way. When my child is sick and they're beginning to get sick, there's this phase in my kid's life where they listen to me, and it's like they have lost any will that they have. And as nice as that is, don't get me wrong, Mary Beth and I are always really sad when that happens because we realize what's happened. That is a child without a will. That is a child who has no dreams. That is a child who is struggling so much that they're just utterly just like robotic, right? And to be a robotic replica doesn't intrinsically honor your father and mother, okay? The other way that this really breaks down, this idea of kind of just willing oppression is this. That almost never lasts an entire lifetime, right? No one lasts in that kind of mode with their parents forever. Eventually it breaks down and cracks, and it leads to the second problematic posture towards the fifth commandment, and that is complete rejection, right? My parents were campus ministers for 30 years, yes, at the University of Auburn University. I almost said University of Auburn, which is, Auburn, Molly knows, right? That is not something you say. Sorry, Auburn University. But 30 years, and they watched kids come in from very small rural Alabama and legalistic churches and quite often legalistic homes, and it kind of ruled that there are exceptions to the rule. There are exceptions to the rule, but the rule that they kind of live by is the more legalistic the home, the more radical the rejection will be in the child, okay? And if this interpretation is played out where you just, I'm entering to honor my father and mother, it just means to live under their tyranny, it usually just leads to rebellion, right? I mean, think about it this way. If you aren't exposed to new things and you aren't taught to think for yourself, but all you are kind of trained to do is just follow whatever your parents say without thinking, then when you hit the real world and you're exposed to new things, what's going to happen? You're not going to know how to engage with it, right? you don't know how to respond. So that's one way that this breaks down. Also, I'm very willing to admit this as well. Often, complete rejection, children will completely reject very good parenting. All right, that happens all the time too. I've watched that happen many, many years, right? So it isn't just like, the parents are like, I'm going to have tyranny over you, and the child rebels against that. Parents can be amazing parents, and their children still reject them, right? Which neither of those, though, honor your father and mother, right? So willing oppression, complete rejection, those don't honor your father and your mother. However, I don't think most people don't function in either of those paradigms or either of those postures. The third and most common posture I have seen towards the fifth commandment is one, not of, I'm going to just willingly, submit myself to tyranny. It's not complete rejection. It's absolute apathy to the fifth commandment, right? We see it as oppressive, and therefore it is outdated, and therefore we think to ourselves we can neglect its wisdom. It's the Old Testament, so we can unhitch ourselves from it. Some of you maybe picked up on the thing I said there. Sometimes we fall into the mindless obedience category. Other times we fall into the rebellion category. But for the most part, we just see our parents as our parents. Sometimes we like them. Sometimes we don't. When I talk to college students about this verse, I say sometimes your parents like you, and I'm confident sometimes they don't like you. I love you though, buddy. That was Jesse. But either way, we don't tend to think critically about our relationship with our parents. We aren't actively striving to obey the fifth commandment. I just want you to think for a second. How often do you think to yourself, I am actively striving to obey the fifth commandment? I mean, does that cross your mind on the regular? No. For the most part, no. And by the way, the fifth commandment still applies to you if you're 80 and your parents are dead. There's no time limit or time cap to the fifth commandment. So you may think to yourself, you're beyond the fifth commandment. You are not. We don't all have children, but we all have parents, right? Okay. I want to challenge us this morning to see apathy towards the fifth commandment as a grave mistake. Because here's the thing. As was pointed out to us in our scripture reading, the fifth commandment is the only commandment in which there is a promise attached to it. It is not just honor your father and mother, right? It is honor your father and mother. Why? So that you might live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. Now, I don't think this is some sort of kind of carrot and stick thing that God is doing here, right? If you do this, I will make you happy. And if you don't do this, I will kill you. That is not what God is saying. That is not the way God works. The God that is revealed to us in the Bible, that is not the way he works. We know that, right? We know that. I hope you know that. He is not manipulative. But this is a promise attached to the fifth commandment. This promise that's attached to the fifth commandment is pointing us to a reality about the way God structured the world. Our relationship with the people who to existence is extraordinarily important. It is extraordinarily weighty. If we don't think critically about it, if we don't unpack the good and the bad, and the fond memories, it is eventually going to bubble up and weigh heavily that if we neglect the fifth commandment, it's going to weigh on us so heavily that it first decreases our quality of life in such a way that it'll decrease our quantity of life. Do you hear what I'm saying? That if we don't obey the fifth commandment, it will decrease our quality of life in such a way that it will eventually decrease our quantity of life. And that is what honor actually means, okay? To give something the weight that it is due. To recognize something's power and influence in our lives. Let me put it this way. We can either unnecessarily bear the burden of all our familial baggage, or we can honor our father and mother, and in so doing, give them back the baggage that they passed on to us. So today I simply want to offer 7 ways, yes, 7 very short, 7 ways for us to do just that, to give our parents back the weight that they are appropriately due. However, before we start that process, I feel incumbent upon me to make a couple disclaimers. The first is this. If I'm going to give you advice on how you should relate to your parents, you deserve to know about my relationship with mine, right? I think that's fair. And as most of you know, my dad did die in 2013. I was 20 years old, and obviously that carries a lot of sadness and suffering along with that. But really, for this context, for those of you who have one dead parent, you know that drastically changes your relationship with your living parent, right? If you have a parent that has died, the relationship with your living parent drastically changes, okay? And that happened for me at a very young age. And so me and my mom have had to work through quite a few things because my dad died, okay? And so there's complicated parts of my mom's and I relationship. And I love my mom and she loves me and she's an amazing parent. But I mean, there's no way that didn't complicate our relationship, right? I went to counseling, and a lot of what we talked about was how am I now supposed to relate to my mother after my dad died, okay? And so, yes, you deserve to know that. But here's the thing. Here's what you deserve to know. When it comes to parents, I really did hit the jackpot in a lot of ways. I am spoiled. Yes, they're not perfect. Yes, they made mistakes, but they were loving. They were gracious. They encouraged me to think beyond myself and think for myself, yet while still providing healthy frameworks for me to do that out of. They gave me safety nets for when I made mistakes. I mean, they were amazing parents. And so there are some things that I can't speak directly into. If you come from an extraordinarily damaged home, that wasn't my experience. And you deserve to know that as I give this advice, okay? So some of you might want to take this with a grain of salt. However, I think some of this is still valuable for you to hear. The second thing that I want to note before jumping into this is that this advice was originally geared towards college students, okay? I mean, there's no, I'm not going to hide that from you. Yes, I was a campus minister before coming here. And so if you are 30 or below, this is going to speak directly into your life. And so my encouragement to you is listen up, all right? If you're in between the ages of 10 and 30, this is going to be straight up for you, no caveats, all right? You should listen to this. However, as I pointed out, no matter what age you are, even if your parents have passed, the 5th commandment still applies to you. We do not all have children, but we all have parents, and we all come from a complicated web of relationships called a family that is deeply shaped who we have become today, right? And so we still, even if you're 80 and both your parents are long gone, need to honor our father and mother and give them the weight that they are appropriately due so that their weight doesn't weigh down your life now. All right? So let's begin 7 ways that we can honor our father and mother. If you want to honor your father and mother, if you want to give back to your parents the weight that they're appropriately due, if you want to give them back the baggage that they passed on to you, all right, which is what I think the 5th commandment means, recognize that your parents are human. Honor your father and mother. Give them the weight that they are appropriately due. Nothing more, but nothing less. All right? Your parents are not God, so recognize that they're merely human. Okay? And therefore have baggage themselves. You see, honoring our parents, I think, starts off with forgiving our parents. And forgiving our parents starts by having empathy for our parents, putting ourselves in their shoes. Right? Think about it this way. You don't have to raise your hand, but I want you to nod your head if you agree with this statement. You have baggage because of your parents. Everyone's head should be nodding. That is true of you. Sorry, funny. There's things I get to see from being up here that you don't get to see, okay? And there was a funny thing that happened. Okay, so we all have baggage because of our parents, right? But let me ask you this. Is the same not exactly true for your parents? Think about of all the baggage that your parents passed on to you, is it not generational baggage that they received from their parents? Let's depersonalize this so you can maybe conceptualize this better. Think about your sibling. Does your sibling have baggage from one of your parents that one of your parents received from their parents? Yes, right? Your parents are merely human. And if you want to honor them well, if you want to give them back the weight they're appropriate on your life, not by lording it over them, saying, you just have given me all this baggage. That's not freeing, right? The fifth commandment free us so that you might live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, right? It's about freedom, not oppression. Well, how do we give our parents back the baggage that they passed on to us? It's not by lording it over them. Look what you did to me. I blame you for this. I blame you for that. No, it's not that. It is what? It is forgiveness. Forgiveness frees us to honor our father and mother and live long in the land that the Lord our God is giving us. The second thing a way to honor our father and mother is to recognize your parents and yourself, all right? So don't just recognize your parents are human, but recognize your parents and yourself. And let me give this caveat, both the good and the bad, right? Up until about 2021, I was really only comfortable recognizing that I was like my father, okay? And what I mean by that is I wasn't comfortable recognizing to people that I was very much like my mother. Okay? And the reason for that is because I'm very much like my mother, okay? And there are parts about me that I find frustrating. My mother and I, as I said, we have some complicated parts of our relationship because my dad is already dead, and there's just things we've had to work through, and because we're very similar, it proved to be complicated, okay? However, some of the best things about me, this sounds arrogant, but some of the best things about me come from my mother. At my old job, my bosses, my shepherds, the thing that they appreciated about me the most is that I was hyper-organized, okay? And that does not come from my father. It comes from my mother, all right? And I got that from her. And until I recognized that I received that from her, both through nature and nurture, right? Until I recognized I received that from her, I was never fully able to tap into that gift and wield it to serve others well. All right? When you recognize the source of something, you can tap into it in ways that you otherwise cannot. In the same breath, some who know me well might say that I am controlling. Now, I don't know why they would say that, but some have charged me with that. And that also, too, comes from my mother, all right? She had a lot that she had to manage. She spun a lot of plates, and so she needed to control a lot of things, right? And both through nature and nurture, that was passed on to me. By the way, my organization and my control are birthed out of the same spot of my life. And sometimes it's wielded for good, organized, and sometimes it's wielded for not good, control, right? And it is only when I recognize that part of me was both passed on to me by nature by my mother and also nurtured within me by my mother that I was able to amplify the good, but hear this, give back to your parent the weight they are appropriately due, and was able to begin to give back to her the controlling parts. Honor your father and your mother, right? By the way, my mom is recorded. She'll listen to this. She's an incredible woman. She's heard me say this. This won't surprise her. She's an amazing woman. I mean, and I'll actually use her as an illustration for something later on. But we have to recognize both the good and the bad, because when we recognize the good traits we inherited from our parents, we can tap into them. And when we recognize the bad traits we inherited from our parents, we can finally face them, right? And give them back to our parents and process them so that they don't weigh on our lives. The third way that we can honor our father and mother this morning is that we should speak well of our parents and esteem them in public rather than degrade them. I'll admit, this is particularly geared towards if you are under the age of 30, all right? So if you're under the age of 30, cue in on this, okay? I think it's very popular right now to air out our dirty laundry in public. All right? But I think we need to ask ourselves the question when you think about the way you talk about your parents in public, are we gossiping under the guise of authenticity? Okay? Quite often, I think, when you want to get so close to them, you share your baggage with them. You tell them about all the ways that your parents have kind of ruined your life. And through that shared baggage and that shared trauma, I'm putting trauma in quotes there, then we become close and we become friends. Okay? Are we gossiping under the guise of authenticity? All right? Now, I'm not saying that we should neglect real hurt and real wrong and real pain and real baggage that has been passed on to us. Some of us come from deeply distorted homes in which parents did not love you well. I'm not saying you neglect that, but I'm trying to say this. The best way to deal with that is not to gossip about our parents in public, but rather to go to counseling. Someone who's legally obligated to not talk to it about anybody else about it. Or find a group of close friends and peers and maybe mentors and process the baggage that your family passed down to you in private. Because here's the thing, gossiping about your parents only furthers the tyranny of the baggage they passed on to you. It makes it public, everyone knows it, and you just continue to be weighed down by it. What do you honor your father and mother? Give back to them the way they appropriately do. How do you do that? It isn't by talking poorly about them in public. If you want to be freed from the real hurts and real wrongs that your parents have maybe passed on to you, go to counseling. Share with a mentor. Talk with a very close group of friends about things you're struggling with in your relationship with your parents. But don't airing out your dirty laundry in public is not something that is going to free you from the weight your parents have passed on to you, right? Fourth thing, it isn't just recognizing our parents are human, not just recognizing our parents ourselves, not just speaking well of our parents, but we should, and I think this may be the hardest one of all, we should seek our parents' wisdom, okay? Seek our parents' wisdom, trying to learn from them what we can. George Orwell, y'all familiar with George Orwell? What did he famously write? 2 books. The first is A Number, and the second is Animal Farm, right? George Orwell. But he has this very famous saying in which he says this. He says, each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. To put it this way, we think that we are smarter than our parents, but wiser than our children. Right? We think that we are smarter than our parents, but our parents think they are wiser than us. Now, part of that's true, okay? If you are younger, you have more knowledge at your fingertips than your parents had because of the internet, okay? That's part of what Orwell was talking about. You have more intelligence in that sense. You have more knowledge at your fingertips. However, there is such a thing as false intelligence, right? Quote unquote, fake news, okay? It's a real thing, right? Fake news is real. But, I mean, think about that. We should not conflate intelligence and wisdom. Because wisdom knows what to do with intelligence, right? Wisdom knows what to do with knowledge, okay? But think about this in the relationship with your parent. Because of this reality in which we think we're smarter than our parents, and our parents think they're wiser than us, that makes seeking advice from our parents very difficult, and that works in both directions. And I always tell college students, I would tell them this, I would say, you want your parents to think you're mature, right? And the gut instinct of a college student is they come back home from college, so let's say they experienced their freshman year, they've experienced all these new things, they are more intelligent than they were when they left, right? And so they walk back into their home and they kind of strut around thinking they know everything, and they're used to, they haven't been living under their parents' roof. I can make it on my own. I live in a dorm. I can figure these things out. I don't need you anymore. And they want to prove that to their parent, right? And I would tell them again and again and again, if you want your parent to treat you like a mature adult, seek their wisdom, and they'll begin treating you like a mature adult. Because what does a mature adult do? They're secure enough in themselves to admit that they don't know everything. Seek your parents' wisdom where you can. Seek your parents' wisdom where you can. As difficult as it is, ask your parents for advice, right? To honor our parents, we don't have to do exactly what they advise every time. However, we should value and hear this, weigh their opinion if possible. They gave us life. And so at least at least what we can do for them is listen to the wisdom they share with us, even if you don't agree with it. The fifth way to honor our father and mother, redeem your parents' wrongs. As I said, I don't come from a family where I feel like I was abused by my parents, emotionally, physically. I mean, there's no way was I abused by. I don't. And a lot of people come from homes that are very difficult, right? And there was a time in my campus ministry where every leader came from what was called a broken home, where either there was a parent that had not neglected the child, or the family was divorced, and it was difficult for that kid, or the parent had died. I mean, so I remember just giving this advice, like, to honor your father and mother might, in some instances, look like redeeming your parents' wrongs. All right? This is the way one preacher who came from a very difficult home, this is the way he framed it. He said, honor your parents by living the lives that they should have lived. And so if your parent wasn't faithful, you seek to be faithful. Your parent wasn't present as a parent. If you have children, you be ultimately present with your children. One of the best ways to honor your father and mother if you come from a broken home is to live the life that they should have lived and redeem their wrongs. And in some ways, almost using your parents' shortcoming as a motivation. Give them back the weight they're due. You were meant to do this. You did not, and so I will do it. I will do it for you, so that the generational baggage will not be passed down from grandparent to grandchild. Sixth thing, you see, we're moving through these quickly, all right? I know when I said 7, and usually I only have 3, that some of you got worried, but we're moving through these quickly. Sixth thing, if at all possible, don't outsource your parents' care. To put it another way, if your parents took care of you as a baby, which they did, they wiped your butt, you take care of them in their old age. Psalm 72, verse 9 reads, do not cast me away when I'm old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone. The psalmist's fear is that in a nomadic society, when they age, they will become nothing more than dead weight, right? And I want you to think for a second, in our society, we just got done talking about Sabbath and the idea of restless busyness, right? And in our society that puts a premium on busyness, that puts a premium on achievement and doing things and moving quickly, right? Who gets left behind in that scheme? People over 80. One of the best ways we can show to the world the love of God and the beauty of God's love is to care after those who society wants to marginalize. Our society, I'm willing to admit this as a young person, wants to marginalize you if you're over 80. We want to shove you in a nursing home, and we don't want to see your age because we fear becoming old too. And if we as Christians want to live counterculturally and therefore witness to the world the love of God, what we will do is we will honor our father and mother by caring for them when they're old. Now, I want to be very clear on this, and I told you I'd come back to my mother, and here it is. My mother's parents died. One died when she was 17, and one died back in the 90s. Her dad died very young. Her mom died, frankly, at a very young age. My dad's parents, my granddad just died. My mom is still taking care of my dad's parent. My mom's mom, though. My dad's mom, though. She's the kind of person we should be. She is the beautiful countercultural witness. By the way, in-law relationships are not easy. Can I get an amen? By the way, I actually kind of hit the jackpot. Mine's very easy, but like for a lot of people, that's not easy. My mom takes care of her dead husband's parents. And as she does that, it is the most beautiful witness to the world of God's love for his people. I want to caveat this. That doesn't mean that there's not professional help involved. That there's not, and that's going to be necessary. So when I say take care of your parents in their old age, I don't mean that you're not going to have to involve professional help, and you might not have to involve a nursing home or in home health and home care. I'm not saying that, but you don't get to just jettison your parents and leave them to just in-home care and a nursing home. Does that make sense? The seventh and final thing is this. Don't take your parents for granted. Their time and their service and their wisdom. At this point, right, I have a dead dad. And I never, except for in this singular lesson, this is the only time I will say this. And it's the only time I will play this card. But if you have a living parent, do not take them for granted. One day, I went to bed. I was living with my parents when I was a sophomore in college. They made a great deal with me the summer in between my freshman year of college and sophomore year of college. I got a study abroad in Spain, and the way we worked that out financially is that I lived at home with them, okay? That's the way we worked that out. And so I studied abroad in Spain. I lived at home with them. And I had the opportunity on a Wednesday night in December 4th to watch a movie with my dad. But I was nearing finals, and my studies took precedent. So I went upstairs, and I studied. The next day, I was supposed to get Chipotle with my dad for lunch. And he never answered his phone. And I came home, and I found him dead on the bathroom floor. Don't take your parents for granted. I thought I had more time than I did. And what I would do to have that night back and to watch that movie with him. Right? Right? Don't take your parents for granted. All right. If you are over the age of 50, at this point, you might think to yourself, Ben, this has had nothing to do with me. This is, fine, but, who cares, okay? Or you may be thinking to yourself, wow, that's the best sermon Ben's ever preached. My kids need to listen to it, all right? I mean, it's one of those two thoughts is probably stirring in your brain at this point, okay? But I do not think we have fully unpacked the fifth commandment if we do not recognize its mirror implications for parents, okay? Don't worry, this is short. If our children are supposed to honor us, the mirror implication for you as a parent is that you should be honorable as a parent, right? Put it another way, if we wield godlike power in our children's lives, then we are responsible to them in radical ways, right? If you bring your child into existence, you are radically responsible to them, okay? Striving to also have a godlike character to accompany that godlike power. And so I want to flip all these 7 ways to honor our parents on their head quickly for those of us who are parents, all right? If you are a parent, you should be honorable by recognizing that you have passed down baggage to your children and that has damaged them and that it complicates the relationship between the two of you, all right? Also, think about it this way, right? If you want to be honorable as a parent, you should recognize that you have received baggage from your parents, and instead of passing it down to your children, honor your father and mother and give back to them the baggage that they passed on to you so that it doesn't go down to your children. If you want to be honorable as a parent, we should recognize that we have passed down not just our good traits, but also maybe we have by nature and nurture, have passed down some bad ones to our children. And by the way, if you're willing to admit that to your children, guess what? It'll make it easier on your children to admit that to you. Model for your children the behavior you want to see in them. You want your kid to recognize that they're stubborn, and you're stubborn, you recognize that came from you. And your child is going to guarantee you this, your child will be more ready and to recognize that to you, all right? If you want to be honorable as a parent, speak well of your children in public and speak well of them to themselves. Yet again, modeling the behavior that you would like them see do of you. If you want to be honorable as a parent, become the kind of person that your parents want to seek, that your children want to seek wisdom from. By admitting that you are not all-knowing. You want to be honorable as a parent. Admit you're not all-knowing. Admit you're not God. Admit you're human. Let me put it this way. Your children need your wisdom. right? I mean, your children deeply, radically need your wisdom. And we can look at our children all we want saying, if they would just listen to me, right? If they would just listen to me. But who cares? That does nothing. Become the kind of person that your children want to seek wisdom from. Because your children need your wisdom more than they know, and frankly, even more than we know. If you want to be honorable as a parent, redeem your own wrongs and admit your failings to your children. I wasn't present then, and I should have been. I'm sorry. You want to be honorable as a parent as you grow older. Admit that you need care. Don't make it impossible for your children to take care of you in your old age. My grandparents won't listen to this. They made that harder on my mom and my dad's surviving brother than they should have. Okay? Finally, and we're done, and I don't have to tell you this, but the stage of life I'm in, I struggle with this every day. It's not just that we shouldn't take our parents for granted, but we shouldn't take our kids for granted either, because as my mom always liked to say, and it really frustrated me when I was a teenage boy, but don't blink, because your kids grow up super fast. I mean, when we moved here, Jesse was an infant little baby, and now he's I don't have a baby anymore. I have a toddler, and I don't have a toddler. I now have a child. And he's just a full-grown kid out in the world. And yes, kids are, in many ways, for some of us, God's gift in our life. And so just as they shouldn't take you for granted, we should not take them for granted either. We should not waste our days on our phones when the beautiful gift of a child is sitting in front of us. There are a lot of ways to close out this sermon. We could talk about, this all points us to the one true Father, that is God. Or, there's a lot of different ways we close this out. But let me close out with this way, because we brought up a lot of the baggage that can happen in families, and a lot of the divides that can happen in families. But the remedy for divides in families and in all of life is the fact that a father was willing to sacrifice his son. And as Colossians chapter 1, verse 20 says, all things were reconciled through the blood that was shed on the cross of the Son of God. And included in all things is even you and your child or your parent with whom you have a terrible relationship with. And in my opinion, that's very, very good news. So if you want to respond to this message in any shape, form, or fashion, we invite you to either meet one of our shepherds in the back or come forward as we stand and as we sing.